In the 15th century, sailing into the open ocean was a gamble with death. Crews braved violent storms, disease, and uncharted waters for one specific reason: the promise of wealth on a scale Europe had never seen. At the time, the global economy relied on commodities like these black peppercorns. Before modern refrigeration, spices from the East were essential for preservation and flavor, making them worth their weight in gold. This map shows the geographic challenge facing European buyers. Every trade route connecting Asian spice markets to Europe bottlenecked right here in the Middle East, where Arab and Venetian merchants maintained a strict monopoly and dictated the prices. That monopoly held until 1498, when Vasco da Gama successfully sailed around Africa and landed in Calicut. Reaching the Indian coast directly bypassed traditional middlemen, yielding massive profits. By opening this sea route, da Gama provided the first viable alternative to the Mediterranean trade monopoly. It provided a roadmap for other European powers, triggering a century-long rush to secure a direct stake in the Indian market. Within decades, the Indian coastline became a map of competing interests. The Portuguese were quickly followed by the Dutch, the British, the Danes, and the French, all building fortified trading factories along the shore. In these early years, the competition was surprisingly balanced. These rival empires entered the region with similar naval technology, comparable military resources, and the exact same goal of dominating the spice trade. But despite the immense power of these European crowns, most of these state-backed ventures eventually collapsed. The ultimate prize didn't go to a king or a queen, but to a single private British corporation. The Portuguese leveraged their position as the first arrivals by deploying heavily armed warships. Their early strategy relied on using these vessels to intimidate local traders and clear the water of rival Arab ships. Governor Francisco de Almeida formalized this as the Blue Water Policy. The directive was simple: focus entirely on maritime supremacy and avoid the high costs of trying to govern inland territories. To maintain this naval edge, Afonso de Albuquerque captured Goa in 1510, turning it into a permanent, fortified physical stronghold that gave Portugal a dominant grip on the western coast for nearly a century. However, the Portuguese eventually undercut their own commercial success with religious zeal. They enforced mass conversions and banned local Hindu customs, creating deep-seated friction with the very people they needed to trade with. This intolerance bred widespread local resentment. It demonstrated that even absolute naval supremacy is difficult to sustain when you have effectively alienated your local labor and consumer base. The French were the last major power to arrive, but they entered with the full financial and military weight of King Louis XIV behind them. This flowchart illustrates the structural burden the French faced. Their trading company was managed directly by government ministers in Paris, meaning every major budget and strategic decision was tied to the bureaucracy of the French throne. This created a critical dependency. When the French and Dutch governments were distracted by wars or revolutions in Europe, funding for their Indian outposts was frequently cut, leading to decisive military losses, like the Dutch defeat at Badara in 1759. Tying overseas commercial ambitions so tightly to the political survival of European monarchs proved to be a structural vulnerability. While state backing provided initial power, it lacked the agility needed to survive a changing market. The British East India Company operated on an entirely different model. They weren't a government department, but a highly independent corporate entity. Governed by a board of directors and accountable to private shareholders, the company was built for adaptability. Every move they made in India was driven by the specific goal of maximizing corporate profit. Unlike the Portuguese, the British initially prioritized secular pragmatism. By avoiding religious interference and focusing purely on commerce, they were able to maintain much more cooperative relationships with local rulers. This diagram demonstrates the company's specific debt cycle. Backed by the Bank of England, the company issued bonds to raise the capital needed to hire private armies and secure trade routes. The resulting profits were then used to pay back investors, providing a sustainable way to fund their own expansion. This financial agility was supported by the growing power of the Royal Navy and the technological advancements emerging from the British Industrial Revolution. By combining corporate finance with a flexible management structure, the British were able to outfund and outmaneuver their more rigid imperial rivals. This corporate efficiency culminated in 1717, when the British secured a royal decree from Mughal Emperor Farrukhsir. The decree granted the company the right to trade tax-free across Bengal in exchange for a small annual fee. This gave them an economic advantage that no other European power could compete with. This tax-free status provided the capital and political leverage the company needed to begin a much larger expansion. It marked the start of a transition where humble shareholders began to evolve into the primary political authority across the subcontinent.